Salvete legionaries. As you can see, this is a very fortuitous, very propitious time. We have a guest that surely all of you know. Many of the people who come to me and like to talk about the content always bring up our man here, Steph UBERBOYO. Welcome to the podcast. Lance is basically a part of the show at this point after how many videos we've made together, so everyone knows Lance as well. But
Greetings.
yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. So I got to ask you a question straight off the bat. You've mogged me already. Like immediately we come in, you've already mogged me. What does propitious mean? That was quite the word. It's quite
Propitious. I'd say, like, to be honest, I just use words for the aesthetic. I assume,
All right. Well,
I assume it means good fortune. Like
Yeah, it's an
tidings.
omen. It's a good omen. Good omen.
that is
There
a
we go.
great
All right,
word.
use it right then. I'm glad I used it right. I thought
No,
it
it's good.
sounded nice.
I'm very similar, man. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Apologies. Sometimes that's annoying, but it's a great word. Like I'm the same. I know words where they fit because I've heard them
Yeah.
before, but I don't actually know what they mean. But propitious is just a great word. I've learned a word. I've already learned something off yous. I feel like I have actually come and gained something off this, which is quite phenomenal. So thank you very much.
Off to a good start. Yeah, so obviously been wanting to have you on the show for a while, so it's great to finally get together. When it came to the early YouTube for myself, obviously, with the Nietzschean sphere, one of the you're probably the biggest guy who talks about Nietzsche, so it's perfect that we can all get together. Got Lance in here, of course, and hopefully we can build the tidings of a new Rome today. But
Yeah, let's go. All right, I'm down.
absolutely. So yeah, so the general topic I wanted to discuss today is, like I mentioned beforehand when we're all talking, Steph is in a lot of the circles where you have this sort of blending of techno-futurism and Nietzscheanism, specifically with Jason Giorgiani and obviously with Prometheism. It's quite interesting stuff. So seeing as your experience in these fields, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about the fusion of Nietzsche being from the 19th century, not having quite the vision of what things would actually look like, but now that we're seeing it all come together, apparently Elon Musk is buying the whole world, so we'll see what happens there. Shout out to my girl Ashley St. Clair. But
She's your girl as well. Oh my days.
hey, before Elon, before Elon. Some people rumor it's not actually his kid, but we don't have to go into that
I saw
today.
Nick Fuentes gave her a nudgie or something. This I was like, this
Yeah,
girl,
he was
what
like
is
trying to
going
get her
on?
in a guillotine. She's been everywhere,
What is going on?
But yeah, so obviously you and Dr. Giorgiani have spoken a lot, and before we get into the nitty gritty, what's your general sort of broad view of how the Nietzschean philosophy has really started to be adopted into this sort of futurist vision, which I think Nietzsche has the essence of this futurist vision in his philosophy, but obviously now we actually are seeing it in real time develop. You have things like Prometheism, which we can sort of delve into as well. But what's your general thoughts on this?
So there's several things that you said, and I'll give a range of opinions on this because I actually, in some sense, would slightly disagree, not disagree, but push back, maybe reframe and rejostle a little bit because I think this is very kind of crass political stuff. But if you look at like the MAGA movement, I think the MAGA movement is at war right now with the current administration in America, where you have the right. I wouldn't even call it the right wing, but the futurist tech bros like Musk. And then you have the more instinctive MAGA people who would be like the traditionalists. And you even see representatives like Musk versus Bannon within the thing. And there's lots of topics that I think this will push up that are going to be very, very highly contested and very controversial. Like IVF is a great example. I noticed that IVF is like like you could say like that's Nietzschean. IVF, create the Ubermensch, use embryo selection, CRISPR technology, create the Ubermensch. Like people can grab Nietzsche and bend him towards this. But I noticed that Christians and Nietzscheans, the kind of more barbarian Nietzscheans, if you so will, they would say, no, this is horrible. I'd imagine like Costa and Alamara would be like, that I don't like that idea of the Ubermensch. Richard Spencer, he's often saying, I like the old fashioned way. So you're getting those Nietzscheans denying it, if you so will. And then you have the Christians, you know, the people being like, no, this is like pretty much as bad as abortion. You know, they're killing all these embryos, all this type of thing. So I'm actually starting to see that divide, that those splits beginning to happen, which I find quite interesting. Something like IVF, do we embrace it? Do we say this is the direction we're going to take things? Because if you go with the IVF vision of the future, you're going to, like, is it going to get to a point where it's like it's more eugenic to literally do IVF and select for IQ and use AI to scan the embryos, and then we stop having normal sex? And then is that like a, what was that meme that was going around? Is that a Nietzschean pro-sex attitude? Like, is that a Nietzschean barbaric instinct attitude? The kind of, as I said, the vision, the Bronze Age mindset vision, kind of dies off in a very significant way. The sort of allure of nature, the seduction of the pagan vital forces of nature no longer enter into the selection process, and they're no longer going to grant us a tyrannical Critias superhuman. That's not going to happen that way. Instead, it's going to be like a load of spindle finger neo nerds, you know, crafting a Superman in a lab or something like that. And that's the kind of vision that's going on. And so I see big fights coming up with this. And I've actually been thinking about this a lot, because I think there's a very very big problem where you could say the more naturalistic right, and even the more Christian right, I just don't have the tech right have a lot of power, maybe more vital power or intellectual power or something like this, to actually force through their vision. And you wonder in the long run who's going to win. Like, it's very hard to say like Musk is going to lose in the position that he is in. He seems more like he could be able to like bully Bannon and maybe even Trump out of the picture and all this type of stuff. So I think there's a very interesting conversation with this right now. And I'd say Giorgiani is like very heavy on like the liberal futurist, tech futurist, you know, Promethean's future thing. So yeah, I see that kind of split. That's the type of divide. I don't know what you think about that, but I think this is a great, very fertile topic of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just step in here real quick, but I think the interesting thing is that, you know, you read, for instance, you brought up Dr. Alamaru, and he wrote that book, Selective Breeding and the Birth of Philosophy, right? And if you think about it, what is the technique of breeding? I mean, obviously, it's about pair bonding, and from the position of animal husbandry, it's the idea of artificially selecting individuals to give rise to certain traits and to make sure the gene pool reflects those interests. Now, the technique might be different in the sense it's a kind of, I guess, evolutionary, let's say, process. So, for instance, back in the day, you didn't have IVF, you didn't have genetic editing. You had, you know, basically there's this stud, there's this awesome bull. We're going to get him to stud all the cows, and we're going to put down the bull that's like has not so great genetics. Over generations, you basically genetically select for the traits that he's breeding for. But I mean, I personally do not see any difference between IVF and animal husbandry, as both are arbitrary and artificial, in the same way that just because back in the olden days we used spears and shields, that somehow, you know, a bayonet is no different than a spear, except it's more efficacious. And so ultimately, I really kind of, you know, obviously I understand the drawbacks, and you're really walking the razor's edge when it comes to, you know, technology, because it could all come tumbling down, like the Tower of Babel, like the Christians like saying, right? However, I just fundamentally don't see any kind of dichotomy or difference between what was already a artificial insemination process to what's happening today. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, you know, I think that there's certainly a romantic element that IVF aesthetically doesn't meet. So you take, for example, I think a very interesting work of fiction that sort of delves into this is Dune, right? They practice selective breeding, they practice eugenics, but they do so outside of this sort of, they get rid of all the artificial intelligence, they get rid of a lot of the technical processes, and their solution is that, well, actually humans evolve by not relying on AI. And of course you have like the Bene Gesserit, and you have all this mind control stuff, so much so that when two people are having sex, the Bene Gesserit is able to control, you know, how specifically in the case of Duke Leto and Paul's mother, I forget her name. She's literally controlling specifically to try to create the He's What Haderach, right? So there's a romantic element that IVF doesn't meet aesthetically, but like you say, when you really delve into the actual result, it is largely the same. But I think people do still like that sort of, you talk, Steph talks about the Bronze Age mindset, right? We have this aesthetic of this strong conqueror who's going out there and banging a longhouse Europe woman, or whatever. And of course, with IVF, it just doesn't fit that romantic element. But largely, it's the same result. And have you guys both seen Gattaca?
I have,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what we're describing here, right? Is there a future like Gattaca where you're literally creating the perfect offspring based on two parents, the best looking, the strongest, the smartest, whatever? And is there anything wrong with that? But I would say, if we're going to bring this back to Nietzsche, I think, yeah, I mean, both of you kind of seem to be in agreement here, or I guess at least Lance, I'd probably get Steph's opinion. But yeah, I think IVF largely, if you are selecting for specific eugenic characteristics and traits, then it is eugenic. It doesn't fit our romantic notion of eugenics and sex, I guess, right? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there's a couple of spins on this. So, for example, I guess it's framing it as like the futurist versus the traditionalist, because I'm just illustrating this as like a problem mainly.
Right.
You could say a mental problem within the right wing, whatever you wish to call it. Where like you bring up Bronze Age mindset. It's actually a really good grounding frame, because something that I wrote a post about BAP a while ago, and I was pointing out that like a lot of people don't like him, obviously, but it's like, listen, you may not like him, but he is like Bronze Age Mindset is a really good book, really, really good book.
Yeah.
And it captures this sort of adventurous spirit. And a lot of it is like, he's obviously like, having a bit of fun and all this, but he's sort of seducing you back into the romance of like the pagan feeling of the past, where, there wasn't as much control over things. There's chaos. Everything is adventurous. You hop on a boat and sail off into a new world. And also like a big phenomenon that he's often talking about is the sort of selection magic of nature. Like, I think he says something along the lines of like a couple, when they fall in love and they have a baby and they do it in a moment of great passion, it's like, that will be a blessed child. Nature is making a selection process there. Nature is like God, making choices and all this. Yes. And that really spoke to a lot of people, because that is the antithesis to the feeling of our lives, which is like highly controlled, CCTV cameras everywhere, highly technological, highly autistic, family planning, put the condom on, sit down and like talk to the girl and be like, what time do we want to sort all this out? And then it's like, all right, look, I'm ovulating on the clock and all this. And then it's managed. We'll have 2.5 kids, and then we're going to pause at that. And then it's like, even the redeemers of the birth rate, they do it statistically. They'll be like, listen, this country's only having 2.7 kids, so we'll give them a 40% tax break and all this. It's all very spurgy and autistic. And right. It's so much more inspiring to like jump back and say, no, break free from that. And I was trying to think of like a good, strong argument against Costin, against his work. Like, where does he make a mistake? Because, you want to steel man him and be like, all right, strong case against him. And I noticed he often undercounted technology, and he's kind of changed his opinions a little bit. But I found like old posts and stuff like this where he was saying like, AI is not going to happen. He was sharing some guys who were like, guys that were, I forget their name, Scott Laughlin, I think his name is. And he was saying that like AI is overhyped and all this type of stuff. And he was very pessimistic on AI. And I think this is really like BAP was really showing a way of thinking in the right wing that was very prominent. He was representing it very, very well, which is that like AI technology, the future, a lot of these promises from the tech world, they're all fake and gay. It's not going to happen. They're overhyping you. It's all GDP nonsense. It's not going to turn out to what it is. And instead, we're going back. Like, what was his sort of idea? The world order is going to collapse and we're all going to become pirates again, and nature will return with force. This type of thing. And to some extent, he's correct, obviously. And I'm not saying this is an either or, but he undercounted AI. And I think an awful lot of that stuff came with force and showed up with force. And in the last couple of years, it's proven itself to be very, very real. And the MAGA movement, in some sense, has thrust itself forward on the backs of like technologists and things like this. So I see these two forces are really prominent, because you have in like the right wing a lot of Luddites, a lot of people are like, AI is fake, it's not real art, it's not true. blah 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 blah, like all this type of stuff. They hate technology, understandably. Like, I completely understand how it kills the romance and all this, but they're kind of getting they're getting hit in the side as they're going through the success of their political movement, because in some sense it's marrying to the technologists, and they're the ones dragging it forward. So these are like two really, really prominent separating instincts that have to come in conflict at some point. And I see, again, I guess the reason why I'm bringing this up in regards to Nietzsche is because I see Nietzsche as almost like the avatar for both. Everybody I speak to in the technologist sphere, they read, like, they'll read Bath, and they'll talk about Nietzsche, and they'll talk about like my videos and stuff like this, and then they'll come and they'll digest Nietzsche through the frame of him being pro-futurism and pro-technology. They bias towards what they are. And then you talk to like a traditionalist, and they're like, man, I can't wait to just like blow up all the data centers and stuff like this, and let's go Luddite mode, and then we can just start like setting up proper harems and start fucking people like crazy again. And it's like, you know, that's Nietzsche. We're gonna go Nietzsche mode, you know. And so there's these, it's like we're splitting his knowledge to suit us, this type of thing. So yeah.
So just to steel man, I guess the opposition, which I think there is some truth to it, right? So we're talking about IVF and breeding, and so the antithesis is also true. And so, for instance, just like Nietzsche would say, there's more wisdom in your body than all your philosophy, or, you know, there's a paraphrase, but the greater point is true, right? And it reflects in breeding itself. So, for instance, people don't know this, but the reason why there are vaginal secretion when a woman is aroused, etc., it increases sperm motility. But the interesting thing is that sperm motility increases specifically in what is considered to be like the select best specimens of that, you know, sperm load. I hate to be crass, but unfortunately we're talking about it. And so the most interesting thing that I think also kind of flies in the face of AI and these tech bros and stuff like that is the idea that, for instance, after war, for whatever reason, there's this physiological likelihood that a woman will give birth to male offspring more so than female. And it's still a mystery as to why, but it does underscore the shortcomings of technology, because just as BAP would say, it is, you know, technology at most is a fumbling, machine learned type of approximation to nature, and it will never be quite in tune to what the organic being can accomplish on its own. And so, you know, that's the steel man. And I think there is a truth to the risk that we run when basically in this sterile and purposeless existence, this zeitgeist, that it's only it's fueling flames to the fire, right? And that ultimately this birthing idea, if you make it arbitrary and abstract and artificial, it's only going to exacerbate the circumstances. And you see this in antiquity and in royal houses, for instance, where people are expected to breed artificially, like, oh, you know, I bought this woman because we're a right match, you know, the Habsburgs and so on. And that's incredibly, you know, to make it completely a rational deduction to have children is an indictment in itself, and it reflects in late European aristocratic families. And so there is a truth to the fact of being in the passionate embrace of love when you conceive of a child, for many more reasons than the abstract notion of IQ and physical selection, which might escape someone like Giorgiani or the futurists, etc. So maybe you guys can think about that, but I think there is some truth to that.
Yeah, for sure. But part of it is also, well, has the formula been perfectly concocted yet? Because obviously, even within technology, there's still a lot of aspects of technology that haven't caught up to nature. So you talk about, for example, you know, the pair bonding, which creates the strong virile child. You know, hypothetically, if you had some computer program that could attach you to your perfect match, right? You're gonna have the most amazing chemistry, the most amazing sex, or whatever. Then, you know, theoretically, you think of it as, well, technology brought about this. So there's a few different ways to look at that. But, you know, the larger thing here, right? We're talking about people appropriating Nietzsche for their ends, or we're talking about the right as a whole, and the sort of, you know, traditionalist versus the futurist, right? And where that's sort of going. And I think it's interesting because, even with a company like Arctos, for instance, right? Largely the resurgence of, or not resurgence, but the popularity of Arctos in large part has been tied to reprinting Evola or retranslating Evola, who's, you know, probably the most popular traditionalist, right? I mean, Dugin kind of is a traditionalist as well. But then, of course, another on the other side, you know, a big part of Arctos' popularity is also tied to Giorgiani, right? So you have like one company that is sort of representing both sides of this, and I think ultimately, you know, before passing it on, the way I see it is a lot of the critiques of technology aren't so much a critique of technology, but the way that technology is being used. And at least that's my view towards it, you know, and my own position is that when you see these things that trad people are so in opposition to, it's not necessarily the actual technology itself, but the way it's being used. It's being used in a way that promotes this sort of you know, basically the sort of world we see in Fight Club, right? And
Agreed.
you know, so you get guys who like Kaczynski, they start reading Kaczynski like, oh, you know, destroy the modern world, revolt against the modern world. But then we think, well, is this because technology is gay, or is it because the way we're using technology is gay? What if we were using technology to go fight space aliens, you know, or some shit, or, you know, we're doing Avatar? You know, I don't think anyone would say that technology in Avatar is gay, you know, with the big freaking you know, walking tank thingy. So I don't know. That's just my position, but I'll pass it on to Steph and see what your thoughts are.
Again, there's loads of things here. Well, maybe I'll do one comment on that technology thing, because this is again a very application of Nietzsche here. Nietzsche, the more of the psychologist, you know. We have a very, very prominent propensity towards fantasy, and reality is almost never as flattering as we want it to be. And so I actually often hear people say this is going to sound very pessimistic, but I often hear people say, like, you know, if we only used technology a bit better, you know, we were better with the way we use technology. But that's, I don't think, has that ever actually happened? Like, has technology ever really been applied in the way that we had this human ideal? It seems like Nick Land is much more correct. Nick Land basically runs with his thesis of technology is almost like a aware, or maybe I shouldn't say self-aware, but independent entity. It is a figure that is outside of human control, and it's snowballing forward in history. And the cascade of capitalism and technology is escalating. The Industrial Revolution is escalating, and it's not in our control. We don't get to decide how it works. We're not able to turn around and be like, please be a little bit more human. It's long discarded of the human involvement per se. Like, and the actual end manifestation of this symbolically is a machine that is alive, artificial intelligence. It's like literally discarding us altogether. The robots now rising up now and all this type of stuff. And if you just cut out the hope that we have to fantasize and say we need a human, and you just look at the reality, you'll see that like the actual trend that has been playing out has been gradual dehumanization. A war started off with like, you know, the organic swords, and it was probably more heroic, and then that moved on to guns. Now it moved on to the World War I trenches, which were just completely, you know, dehumanizing in many ways. And you have heroes like Younger who were able to redeem it. But the progressive feeling, is that actually getting better? Is that getting, look at the Ukraine war with the drones, this type of thing? And are we actually just escalating more and more towards actual dehumanization, to the point where we have like AI robots running around fighting wars, saying that, like, I'm not even sure if you humans are necessary. We'd kill you if it was necessary to fight you, but you're just kind of in the way at this point. So it's like, stop. And so there's this like way more bleak attitude towards it. Again, this is a good critique of the tech world. Scott Laughlin, that guy that BAP often shares, he just is brilliant at this, because always what you see in the tech world is overpromise, underdeliver. It's like the phone. The phone is going to change your life. We'll have all of the world's knowledge in your hand. What does the phone bring? Mass sterilization. Fucks up relationships, OnlyFans, mass pornography watching, autism, damaging children's brains when they use it too much when they're kids, chronic addictions. It's worse than drugs when it's coming around in this type of way. People develop weird social cues and all this. So in some sense, the more technology gains power, it never fulfills our romance. It doesn't seem like it has an intention. It seems like it's got its own intention, which is to create self-aware functioning technology, and we're just getting like drugged along with it. And so like this would be the Luddite argument, is that like the actual thing, if it's even possible, is to like try burn it all down. And yeah, like maybe we can't do that. And the problem is that it's too late for us to break down the factories and go Fight Club mode and go back to the return. And there's going to be no return. There's going to be no return of nature. This is just going to continue to escalate. Technology is going to win. And basically, like, people like Musk and the technologists are not leading this. They're getting on board with the winning team, which is technology. They're all going to try to become transhuman cyborgs that get brought up with this thing, and the rest of mankind will be left behind. So that would be the most pessimistic thing. Now, I've something else I wanted to say, but like, let's just roll with that for the time being.
Sure. And, I don't mean to cut in before passing it off to Lance, but, when we talk about things like transhumanism, for instance, and of course we can go back to the quote from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, well, man is a bridge, right? Man is not an end. And when we think about, well, what are we going to evolve into, right? And are we going to evolve organically, or is our evolution going to be this sort of transhumanist cyborg type thing? I think one thing to consider is, if we do have a future evolution that is inhuman, right? And a lot of the Heideggerian people, you have anyone who's interested in like Heidegger or Kaczynski is obviously going to push back against, losing the essence of humanity. But I think to some degree, if the evolution, especially if it's inevitable, right, and there's nothing you could do about it, are you going to resist this evolution, or are you going to literally ride the wave and find a way to insert yourself into the fabric of whatever makes up this future entity? And I think that throughout history you see many noble peoples, right, who are defeated because they try to resist the tide. You see this in the South. You see this with the Meiji Restoration, right? If you don't adapt to the times, you don't insert yourself into this upwards mobility, then you're just going to be defeated altogether. And I think to some degree, right, if this AI, this technological being exists without any sort of essence of humanity, like something like a Terminator, right? And you get Skynet and they're not humans at all. They're just this completely new thing. Then as a human, of course, well, you kind of have to resist it, because not existing at all, there's nothing you could do. But if there's a way to insert yourself into the fabric of whatever might exist in the future, then I think by not putting yourself within that, not inserting yourself, it doesn't really make sense. So it really depends, I think, if you can find a way for artificial intelligence and technology to still, have sort of hand in it, or are you just going to be excluded entirely? You know what I mean?
So let me pop in, Lance. Apologies.
No, please.
We're playing ping pong. We're not passing the ball. So this like illustrates something that's been going on in my head. I might even try to write a little bit of like bio fiction on this, because I think it'd be the funnest way to explore this. I think what I'm seeing in the Nietzscheans is a bifurcation, a splitting into a very serious contest about what is the path to the Superman, what is the path to the Overman. Because the Zarathustrian prophecy, we must overcome mankind. There's the down going into the last man is happening, and you would have BAP will say selective breeding, birth of philosophy. I understand Lance was saying there's a technological side of that, but like I'm just going to go with it in its essence. It seems like it's like return to nature. Have the moral strength to reevaluate your morals and just say eugenics is okay, and we're going to go and we're going to breed properly, and we're going to create health, and we're going to have men fight to the death in the UFC, and then the best guy gets to breed like 20 girls and this type of thing. Like that's how, like we're just going to say that's okay. That's for the best of mankind. It's going to cause a little bit of savagery, but that's the way we should do it. That's, a moral evaluation that will create the best specimens, and mankind will begin to shuttle upwards once again. So that's the kind of prophecy of the Übermenschen would say. The way we get there is through a mental, moral reevaluation that allows us to embrace the badness that is in us and accept that it is the best of us. And that actually is the way that we begin to enhance mankind and move them forward. And obviously, like biological training, we all get Ray Pete Max, and then everybody becomes jacked and juicy and healthy and big brains, this type of thing. So that's one angle. That's one suggestion. That's how the Superman is done. And then the other one seems that is floating up right now is very much like what like this idea of the technologists saying that yes, the path forward is literally transhuman. The Superman is not like some like specimen of not some fantasy of the 20th century Germans. It's not like the strongest man with the most muscles. It's not a biological creature anymore. The Superman is a technological man. The biological man is a failed project, and we're now going to lift him out of this and turn into a technological, coordinated, constructed man. And so what you're going to see is IVF babies, CRISPR babies, embryo selection babies, but also other things. You'll have Neuralink that bypasses the spinal cord, and you'll get like cyborg arms. Like this direction, you're going to see this very almost like moral irony happen. It'll be kind of like Christianity, where the first will become last. You'll have some guy who gets his like arm blown off, or he's in a car crash, and he gets Neuralink to heal his injury, and he becomes the first man ever to get a robotic grip, who's got this crushing strength in his grip, to become the most powerful man who's ever lived, because he got a technological enhancement. And so it's like the cripple becomes the Superman. You know, this type of thing is going to happen. And so this is like the almost entire other direction. The crippled sperm that wouldn't have made it by itself gets helped by IVF, and all of a sudden that's going to be genetically engineered. And you're going to see this like Superman getting made by the spindle-fingered technologists. And it seems like there's this fundamental clash between these two. I don't see how these two can reconcile, because they're completely different directions. Maybe obviously like Jung, you know, they could smash off each other and synthesize and turn into something quite interesting. But as they stand now, one of them is like pulling away, saying we need to become immoral and go to into our barbarian nature, and that's how we actually get back to nature and health, and that's what will give us the ideal that we're looking for, which is the superhuman version of ourselves. And then the other side, the flip side, is almost like refusing to morally reevaluate. Its idea of a moral reevaluation is to strip all taboos away from technology and allow the mad scientists to go crazy, and then to construct the Superman, construct the cyborgs, use technology to enhance things. And what will basically happen is it will be like a transhuman cyborg caste will just sort of like break away out of mankind, and they will just launch off and start to accelerate evolutionarily style, and they'll become like just something else entirely. They'll just become completely new entities, and very fast as well, because of the speed of like change. And they will be superhuman. They will be beyond human. They'll be transhuman, if you so will. And I think liberalism, like as much as people are trying to throw away woke now, I actually think the thing that a lot of people missed out, a lot of the chuds, when we were making fun of the idiots that are the like, you know, the transsexuality getting forced on you and all this, I think the thing that was missed that might come back to bite people is that hardcore woke liberalism, transhumanism, is actually preparing mankind for that technological thing where it's like, if technology can fulfill this promise where you can modulate yourself and become anything, thinking more like a transsexual, transhuman person is actually more intelligent. And again, right-wingers will get mad at this, but think about like Zoomers. Zoomers are like transsexuals because Zoomers blast themselves with hormones. Look at Sam Sulek. Like every Zoomer in the gym now is just modulating the body. Like it's happening. We are actually we are technologically enhancing yourself in this way. And there might be maybe a different style of it, but it's still going in that direction. So I think this is a very fertile like way of looking at stuff. I'm not saying I have any idea what's the right perspective, but I noticed this might be the advancements in rhetoric, if you will. What will be the Superman? What is the path to the Superman?
That is incredibly interesting. And I mean, if I would proffer anything, is that ultimately, I guess one of the kind of personal things that I've been trying to teach people, because you see a lot of moralism is couched, like a lot of basically pain aversion is couched in terms of moralism, right? Things are not nice and therefore are morally reprehensible. That's the core of the problem that's existed for a very long time. And I think that ultimately, if humanity wants to actually, accrete itself over time, we have to transvaluate our understanding of pain. And why is this related to what we're talking about at hand? Is that ultimately, I think that you're absolutely correct, Boyo, when it comes to, transsexualism being a precursor, or rather a kind of root of transhumanism. You're absolutely correct. And to be frank with you, I don't think the answer to technology is going away or going back. Going back always fails. Going away always fails because they find you. I mean, look at the Native Americans. Look at so and so. I have a friend who literally lives as a Luddite on the Mongolian steppes. I shit you not. He's awesome. You should meet him and probably talk to him. But this is the contention that I have, is that ultimately, and this is where Guillaume Fay, another one of Arctos's releases that is awesome, is about the idea of agency. And so it's not necessarily technology in and of itself, this inanimate I guess would say, pattern of material organization that's the problem. It's our utilization of these tools. So what does that mean? Ultimately, we have to cultivate the inner existential self, which is the use of Nietzsche more than anything, and then understanding the symptoms of our existence, which is pain. And Nietzsche talks about this all the time, where pain is what makes profound, right? And so the fullness of life will not result in running away from a new type of pain, i.e., for instance, or e.g., getting away from the modern world, being sterile, so on. It's going through and being able to effuse a vision of the future, which is able to synthesize the, I guess, what you'd say, the technological development of a time with the truth of the human essence. And so ultimately, it is true, one way or another, humans are always, by accident of mutational load or evolution that we don't understand, but ultimately we will evolve no matter what. Even if we stay the same, we will evolve and adapt to our environment. And in a certain way, over generations, we're fluid. However, the choice is, when we evolve, will we go up or down? And that's the true question in my own mind. And I hope that no one takes this as a go out and trune out or something. I'm just saying that ultimately there's some truth
too
to
late.
Well, no,
I gotta go to the bathroom for a minute, Lance. Sorry.
Well, not to cut in, but there's actually, I think there's a very good sort of dichotomy to bring up here, is what Lance is talking about. You have upwards or downwards evolution, and the flip side of the transsexuals. I mean, Boy already brought it up. Guys like Sam Sulek, guys like the Special Forces. People don't realize 80% of the American Special Forces are all in gear. People don't realize this. Yeah.
Wow.
So they did. There's this big bust in Buds where they found out that everybody in Buds was taking testosterone, because that's the only way that they could get through Buds. Everybody in the Special Forces is doing gear, pretty much, in the United States military, and I'm sure the rest of the world too. Bodybuilders, right, or powerlifters, they're doing gear to do these crazy things that nobody, like, things that Hercules might have done, right? Hercules is real, we are not. So essentially what we see here is we see two uses of technology, or specifically hormones, right? Because essentially what bodybuilders are putting into their body, it's not so different from what the Troons are doing. I mean, I've done a lot of research in this stuff, and once you start doing research, the algorithm thinks you're either trying to become a bodybuilder or you're trying to become a Troon. So once in a while, I get female to male Reddit suggestions of like, no, I'm just trying to learn, man. But what we see here is, are you using this for comfort or power? The transsexual, essentially, I mean, obviously they're never comfortable afterwards, but that's what the sort of psychology is. I'm going to fit in my own skin. I'm going to be who I really am in the inside. The bodybuilders, I don't want to be who I am. I want to be more than who I am. The Special Forces guy, I don't want to be me. I want to be more than me. Same with the athlete. Most athletes are on some form of performance-enhancing drugs, right? Especially nowadays, they have all these different ways to get around the drug testing and stuff. Like, you think LeBron James isn't taking copious amounts of human growth hormone? You know what I mean? So it's like, is it, I'm taking this technology thing to feel comfortable, to be myself. I want to be in my own skin. I was born a woman, whatever. Or I hate who I am now. I want to evolve. I want to become the Overman. I want to do what nobody else can do without the benefits of these drugs or whatever, right? I think ultimately that's what it sort of boils down to, is what kind of transhumanism are we looking for, right? Are we looking to become these amalgamated freaks? I don't know if I used that word correctly, but it sounded right. Or are we trying to be these, these titanic beings, literally becoming titans? Are we going to sacrifice? Like, it was never about health, right? It was never about being healthy. It was about being beautiful. That's what the bodybuilder is. I don't care if I die at 40. I'm going to be this beautiful, jacked, trend out bodybuilder because I want to be powerful, right? So anyway, that's just sort of my 2 cents on that specifically.
So that's I think the absolute correct place to look at this phenomenon with, because again, it's like, it's a philosophical thing. The more technology enhances, the more we actually get bullied back into philosophical thinking, because it's about idealism. It's about ideals. So the transsexual sits down and says, they idealize, they romanticize the idea of being like a girl. They're a lad, and they like, visualize being a girl, Hunter Schafer or whatever that person is. And that's an ideal in their head. That's a fantasy of what they could be. So it's very interesting that technology gives us the power to get close, to grasp more elaborate fantasies. If you said to someone 1,000 years ago, you could be, they'd be like, I want to be a girl. You'd be like, yeah, How about you just go fucking work in the farm and shut the fuck up? How about that? How about you just stop talking this way, or we'll go and give you a whipping or something like this. But during the Roman Empire, when they reached this absolute pinnacle of power, and they had so much liberated power, so basically they liberated a certain class of people, the emperors, and they had just absolute total power. You actually did see this emergence of like transsexualism, and you had I think it was a Caligula who basically said, "I want to be a girl," and then would begin to act like it. They could act out fantasy, So it's interesting that once power gets big enough, our capacity to fantasize, we can embrace more of it. And so the bodybuilder and the transsexual is no different psychologically, in that they're both looking in their head towards an ideal and saying, how can I become this? And they're both augmenting their capacity to do it using hormones. Like, it's the same archetype. Obviously, you can make the argument then, what is the better ideal? And that's obviously where the bodybuilder usually stands in much better stead. It's like, I'm taking what I naturally am and trying to like augment it and enhance it. But you run into all sorts of fascinating problems with this, because do you say to yourself, well, what's the right ideal? Is the bodybuilder right? Or is that him just trying to like manifest a sort of Incredible Hulk vision of mankind? But does he lack imagination? You can start to criticize people's ideals. Is Elon Musk a smarter idealist, in that his vision is like cyborg hand? The bodybuilder thinks he's all great because he builds all his muscles with testosterone, and then Mr. Cyborg hand comes along and crushes everything, and he's like, he doesn't need these stupid human physique. He can just do things with like technology and all this. Or what about the kid who's like not interested in the physique at all, and instead he's like, how can I augment, using Neuralink, augment my memory, or augment my imagination, or augment something like this? And he turns into like just this being that we couldn't quite comprehend, like a superhuman in thought or something like this. So this is a very fascinating thing, because with augmentation and idealism and technology, all of a sudden you actually get asked really hard questions about what would be the best strategy for power. The person who augments IQ, would they end up ruling the world? Right. Could someone augment courage? What would happen then? Like, how would that work? Is augmentation a bad idea because it's always go up really hard, but then there's always a crashing down, and it never quite lasts in the way that you think? So I think these are very fascinating, at the correct place to look, as you were saying.
So, Steph, actually, I have a question for you, because you're a scholar of Jung, and I'd like to ask you about specifically a question regarding, so right now, obviously, within the last 250 years or more, we've had a crisis of morals, or a crisis of ideals, right? And this clash, and we're seeing this now in time, is an interesting time to live in, because of the fact that we are kind of in this pivotal moment in history, ever. I mean, truly ever. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what does Jung say about, let's say, how do we evaluate not necessarily what is good or evil, but what is good or bad in the Nietzschean sense? What does augmenting to, power mean? And is there a meaningful existence once we have, so for instance, you say that we are going to become cybernetic, we're going to become completely inorganic. I understand that. And would that mean in and of itself that the essence of man has stopped at that point? And
it's a good question.
And so I wanted your kind of first thoughts. It doesn't even have to be related, but anything that really comes to your mind, your forefront, just share with us.
Yeah, like loads. I've been thinking about this a lot, because the fundamental challenge of technology is that technology dehumanizes our bodies and amplifies our minds. That's what it does when you think about it. So you think about what happened when nuclear weapons showed up. What mattered less in war was the physicality of war, and it actually started to become more about the abstract decisions. Do you press the button and shoot the bomb or not? Decision making became everything. But the moral question, because all morality is the question of yes or no, right or wrong, which direction to take. That's what you're pondering with something like morality. Should I press this button or not? Is it right, or is it a right or wrong decision? It's all about decision making. And so this is what you see sort of happening to mankind, is that we become like more abstract, and the weight of our decisions become greater. Now, if you like, no one wants to fight a war now, because if you actually escalate a war to its logical conclusion, you're nuking a country until there's like you destroy the race, you eviscerate who you're fighting against, So all of a sudden now, like we're massively restricted, and the feeling we have of modern society, where it seems like everything is just inhibition and crushing of instinct, there's actually a reason for that, because we're so powerful that if we unleash instinct, it escalates into like brutality and all this. And some people might be like, base, that's what we want, shake things up a little bit. But like that's actually the question. That's actually the jostling question. That's the moral quandary. That's the moral conundrum that you're faced with. So morality is the most serious thing. As we enhance and augment, morality becomes more and more serious. When we get to the point where we have like targeted precision drones, morality is like, that's everything. Do we use them or not? That's the big deal. This is the type of thing. So the Nietzsche pointing out that very early that psychological warfare, the worldview warfare, the psychological warfare is slowly going to escalate and become more prominent. Like he was correct. He says this in his famous thing where he's talking about Rome and Judea. Rome, Judea versus Rome. It's in Genealogy of Morals. And he says this began as a physical fight between the nations, and it escalated into a religious war. And as it's gone forward in history, it's more and more become psychological. So we've escalated into psychological war to the point now where like modern wars, it's kind of like, what are we even fighting for? Are we fighting for like moral principles at this point? It's very, very fascinating. So like this is a big question. I think like this is maybe another gripe I would have with the online Nietzschean right, if you so will, is that like there's this big trend where they say Nietzsche's not a psychologist, and they kind of dismiss Nietzsche's psychological moral questioning, which is probably his most like, it is fundamentally the thing he's speaking about.
Right. I'm surprised that there is somebody like that says that. That's crazy. Okay.
I just hear it a lot. I hear it a lot from more the Luddite types. They're like, they'll just say going back to barbarianism is good and all this, and the master morality is based. Let's go kill people and all this. And I'm like
I know the type, yeah.
yeah, that type of thing. But it's like, it's fine. Okay, if you like that, that's cool. But big old mustache Nietzsche, like he was pointing out that this moral ambiguity is a very, very big problem. And so to give you an example, this is almost like an argument against Nietzsche. How do you even think about morality? How do you ponder this type of stuff? So it's very difficult because you have to be able to think of like second order effects and all this. So take, for example, master morality. People would be like, the three of us would say master morality, and all of us would be like, based, class, that's what we want. But you can make a really good argument that master morality is actually not good in the long run. So take Rome. Quintessential master morality, base lord empire. But interestingly, Rome went the same way that the West is going. Why did Rome go this way? Because they had lots of very strong aristocratic moral principles. They didn't believe in labor. They didn't work. They weren't plebs. They didn't go around and fuck around working, doing their own stuff. They took in slaves. So they said, our attitude is we go conquer, we bring in slaves, and they do the work. Now, that sounds based. That sounds very Max Chud. That's exactly what I want to do. But the problem is that as Rome did that progressively, they were so good at conquering, they were such aristocratic masters, that they built up a giant slave population. And Caesar shows up and he's like, all the veterans are feeling disenfranchised because they're all getting kicked off their farms by all the slaves that we're conquering. So it leads to Caesarism. But this just escalates. More slaves come in because Rome are just so good at fighting. And by the end of the Roman Empire, 50% of the cities were slaves. And who knows how many of the intergenerational slaves. It became a slave empire. And as a consequence, a moral system, Christianity, shows up among those slaves, like a woke movement that overthrows the masters. And then all of a sudden you see that the Roman mass morality, because of their love for slaves, their disregard for work, led to them getting racially replaced and their empire falling apart, and a slave morality revolt happening. That's really crazy when you think about it. Does that mean that mass morality is some type of problem? I'll give you another example of this. You take Spain in the colonial era versus the Northern European states, France, England, and all this. So Spain conquered first. It expelled the Muslims and the Jews, and it went hardcore tradcat. They became fucking, absolute groiper chuds. Now, interestingly, they mandated that slavery needs to have human rights involved. So they actually had some of the first abolitions on slavery from the get-go. Columbus brought slaves over to Isabella and the Spanish, and she said, "Send them back. We don't want slaves. We're too Christian. We're too pious for this. We're too much faggots." Apologies for my language. And so what happened is they would practice slavery. They would have slaves, but you had to buy them and you had to pay fair rates and you had to respect them, and they had much more human rights involved. Whereas the other states like Portugal and Holland and England and France, they were just fucking psychos. They were just like, yeah, whatever. Now look at Spanish America versus the other parts of America, you'll notice that all the populations with huge African populations are all either Portuguese, Dutch, or French. And the Spanish parts are way more stable. And they were actually richer for most of history as well. And they have way less racial conflict. And they are way better put together countries because of this early decision, because they didn't take in large amounts of slaves. Like you go to Argentina or something like that, you barely see black people at all, because there was never that historical thing. So there's no guilt inside of the people as well. And it's just very fascinating that's not there. Look, and so the perfect example of this is the Dominican island, Saint Dominica. On the one hand, you have Haiti, which was the slave camp that they sent all the slaves into the United States. That was the slave camp. It was owned by the French, and I think it was the Dutch first. And the other side is, I think, one of the wealthiest countries in the Americas. And it was the Spanish-controlled Dominican Republic, which had the taboo on slavery. And they're like 20% African, whereas the Haitians are like 95%. We're saying the same island, but there's different moral principles in each side of the island. Like, think about how big of a deal that is. You've got the same fucking island, which you've got one moral decision and then like a line and then a different moral decision on the other side. And one of them is a successful society that's somewhat functional. And I know lots of people like Americans and stuff who even go and live there. And the other side is like, there's a cannibal dictator in it right now. You know, that's the difference. And it's weird that it's a cucked faggot slave morality that leads to this. The master morality of the French to be like, we're going to set up a slave sugar plantation and cuck these with a racial caste system leads to a hellhole, and they destroy it. So this is really crazy. And then the last example I have of this is think about the Protestants. You have the Protestants in England. England conquered the world, and the Protestant English abolished slavery. They say, no, slavery's bad. We don't want to participate in this anymore. We're going to be cocked, faggot, slave moralists. We're going to abolish slavery. And all of us chuds are like, oh, they're such idiots. Why did they do that? But what happened with England? They abolished slavery. And because they had the Protestant work ethic, they had to do all their own work. So what did the English do? They're like, well, all right, mate. Well, we better fucking get a machine to do this for us because we can't have slaves. And they have the Industrial Revolution. And what does that turn the English into? The most powerful race who have ever existed in human history. They get Gatling guns, they get cannons, they get trains, they get airplanes, and they create industrialized society. They because of slave, gay, faggot morality, they become supermen. They become more powerful than Rome. The first time in history, everybody lived in the shadow of Rome until the English and the French, because of the Industrial Revolution. So this moral question is huge, and the cascading effects of this stuff is enormous. And it's very difficult to think about this as well, because our bias towards morality is that we want it to be simple, and it has to be emotional, and it has to be fast. But the big picture on this is actually like mind-blowing. I don't even know what to make of this, because does this invalidate Nietzsche? Like, does this mean that the Spanish slave moralist Christians are right? Were the English cooked were they right? Was Rome wrong? It's very, very fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah. If I could interject, also here's like a more small scale example of that, right? You take the Spartans, for instance. Why did Sparta fall? And one of the first books when I was really getting into philosophy I read was actually a history book by a guy named Carroll Quigley, who's a big Spenglerian kind of guy. And he uses this as a case example where they weren't developing new farming techniques because they set a quota for the Helots to produce a certain amount of agriculture each year. So of course the Helots, once they figured it out within their own systems how to do it fast, they're like, all right, we produce, say, 1,000 pounds of whatever, right? Once we do that, we can rest for the rest of the day because we met our quota. So you never have any more progress. So it's, and it kind of goes back to the whole thing where, we talk about this sort of barbarian Nietzschean right, where you live in a parasitic relationship with the lower caste, but to the detriment of your own development over time, which I think is interesting that we're talking about this now. And, when we have to evaluate morally, well, are we going to adopt this master parasitic morality, or are we going to adopt this sort of fusion or what have you? I mean, you look at a tremendous amount of examples like you provide today. I think another one actually is the Han. The Han Chinese conquered every single time throughout their history, probably a dozen times, and yet they're still here, right? How? And there's the obvious answer is there's so fucking many of them, so they can't get replaced. But the Han mindset is almost this sort of resentful, angry, like we were oppressed by the British, or we were oppressed by the West, and we're going to get our revenge. But then it leads to this very powerful manifestation of will to power, in the sense that they have a very clear friend-enemy distinction. And I think that actually is probably the strongest aspect of the more slave morality mindset, is the distinction of friend-enemy. You've suffered so much from this specific group, so you know clearly where to orient your aggressive efforts towards, right? And I think that's the greatest strength of it. So yeah, I mean, this is something we can't just conclude in a little talk, because there's so much to go into that on a small scale. And yeah.
So Lance asked about Jung, because this is why I think Jung is very, very interesting. Jung's thesis in Ion is he creates this story of history that discusses the conscience. He's always banging on about the conscience. You know, Jung ranting away, being a Protestant, typical Jung. But I actually think this is really going to become perhaps the biggest question over the next 10, 20, 50 years, next century, perhaps. Like, this might be our great struggle, because it's the Nietzschean question as well. The conscience is the moral decision. Like, what's the right thing to do? What the voice in my head, the conscience, the higher spirit, what does it tell me to do? And Martin Luther King, you know, when he created Protestantism, sorry, Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King. Wait a second. Holy, whoa.
What timeline are we in?
Yeah, wait a second. Timeline just shifted there, guys. But Luther, like, he's standing in the diet of worms, and he's saying, I have to stand by my conscience and say what I think is right and break from the church. And he creates the sort of liberal, Protestant, progressive destiny that breaks free, and people think for themselves a little bit more than they do in the Catholicism, which is more like ritualistic and automatic. And it's just fascinating to think that led to England, and that led to the Industrial Revolution in many ways. And this then leads to where we are right now, where we are in the modern techno-futurist world, and our moral decisions are massively amplified. And we're kind of coming up to this point now where, in a bizarre way, technology is now invading our conscience. And is that the big question? Because people are drilling holes in our head to put Neuralink in. The phone is stuck in our face 24/7, so we don't even think anymore. The algorithms form our thoughts and our identities. And so is that actually the big thing to say? It's like, all right, is the war we're facing right now, that we're trying to maintain the dignity of our capacity to make decisions, is that the essence of humanity? Because if things go wrong, mankind gets mentally castrated, and we become these sort of like weird, you know, techno addicted Zogbots with nothing going on, you know, like we're just fucked, that type of thing. And there's technology becomes a parasite in our head that makes decisions for us, and we lose agency, like you were just saying a minute ago. Like, that could be the hell scenario, and maybe that also then tells us the heaven scenario, or the correct understanding of what we're trying to do. That, like, as all this technology comes up, we need to actually, like, go in at it, crunch our fist, and start punching to make sure that we ascertain sovereignty, that we come out of this with our imagination intact, with our conscience intact, with our autonomy intact, our agency intact. That could be an interesting question. I'm not sure if that's the correct frame, but that to me seems like the moral question right now. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, kind of, I think, I forget who talks about it specifically, but I believe it's Heidegger who talks about, you know, maybe it's not Heidegger, but somebody like you're either driving the wheel. I mean, it's sort of what you were talking about earlier. Does technology develop on its own, or are you driving the sort of train of technology? Like, which one is it? Are you being driven, or are you driving? You know, my position generally is, yeah, we have to plunge ourselves into it and see. I mean, especially if this is the inevitable future, right? And if resistance means basically annihilation, loss of sovereignty, loss of agency, then you have to do everything you can to find a way to retain some element into it. And I think, you know, it could also be a spectrum of how much does the future resemble what we are now, right? Because is it, you know, you get into this ghost in the shell type scenario where how much of this is still a human, right? And on the flip side, like, is this something that we can even control? Like, how much of this future thing is going to be human? Like, can we even stop a certain result from taking place? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to think about. Yeah, exactly.
No, well, it's interesting, and, you know, obviously this is something that I hope maybe Steph, we have the pleasure of your presence next time. But I think, like, you know, these are like so many ideas we're percolating up here that, honestly, it's always a pleasure to have you on, sir. And please never stop. You're doing a lot of good things. And seriously, and by the way, I love the video, which is related to the topic we're discussing, which is, was Christianity the first woke revolution? And I thought that was absolutely the best one that got you a lot of heat, but it was definitely insightful.
I love that video.
Yeah, we should link it, actually. It's really good, really good. But anyway, Warrior, this is your show, so it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, how much longer you guys want to go? I
have time, man. As I said, like I can go chow down on dins, but I have time. I'm a human, all too human, so I must eat at some point. But
of course. Yeah, well,
maybe I'll just I'll plug myself into the wall or something.
That's right. You've already figured it out, right? Yeah. You were lying to us this whole time. You're part of the Musk, hidden.
Yeah. Wait, plug this out. Yeah, all right. Don't need food. Run on electricity. I've got time, man. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'm down to continue. If you're
Me
down.
too. Me too.
Right,
I just want to make sure that we're not taking too much time with Steph here.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Awesome. Perfect.
I gotta do one of those things where it's like, okay, smoke break. I go for a smoke break. Like Caribbean rhythms. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But, he always does that. He always just takes a break in the middle, and instead of cutting the video to where it just starts right after, it'll be like 3 minutes, and he'll leave the pause in there. I think it's so funny for Caribbean rhythms, and he has some like classical music or like some random Brazilian jazz thing playing in the background. I got to start implementing that into my podcast.